Don't miss this story the world tried to bury. Subscribe now so you never miss what true power looks like when it rises from the soil. They gave him $150 million in debt, thinking it would break him. They thought the pressure, the interest, the global financial chains would be too tight for any young African leader to escape. They assumed he would do what so many before him had done: kneel to the IMF, sign away his country's future, beg for restructuring. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't just reject their terms. He turned their trap into fuel. With that same $150 million they handed him as a noose, he built an empire out of bananas. Yes, bananas. The fruit they laughed at, the crop they called unsophisticated, unscalable, and economically useless for national recovery. But what they didn't understand was that Traoré wasn't trying to impress the West. He was trying to feed his people, free his economy, and build something from the ground up, literally. And so instead of defaulting or begging for mercy, he planted. He planted bananas in state-owned lands, in unused military zones, in community co-ops, in schoolyards. He mobilized youth, trained veterans, funded women's agricultural collectives, and within months, Burkina Faso saw what had never been seen before: self-sustaining green infrastructure growing across the nation. But that was just the start. These weren't just banana farms. They were production hubs. Processing plants followed, drying facilities, packaging centers, cold chain logistics. And with every bunch harvested, Burkina Faso was not just selling fruit, it was selling independence. IMF analysts didn't know how to respond. The country that owed them millions was now exporting more than ever, and not in gold, not in rare earths, but in something far more subversive: food. Because food means control. And when you feed yourself, you don't just survive. You choose. What began as a banana initiative quickly became a strategy of economic rebellion. Instead of using the IMF loan to build highways for foreign mining trucks, Traoré built agro-corridors connecting farmers to local markets. Instead of inviting international experts, he paid rural elders to teach sustainable practices that worked long before colonizers arrived. Instead of sending youth abroad to study Western economics, he created farming schools inside Burkina Faso, where finance was taught through soil, not spreadsheets. The banana became the flag of resistance. On social media, youth posted selfies with fruit and tagged #banana-backed economy. Rappers dropped verses comparing dollar bills to peels. Local artists painted murals of bananas breaking IMF chains. This wasn't just agriculture, it was ideology. A peaceful, edible revolt that sent shockwaves through the global economic order. What they thought would be a debt trap became a harvest festival. And the question now was not whether bananas could save Burkina Faso. It was whether the rest of Africa would follow. If this story already blows your mind, like this video and comment "Banana Rebellion" below. Because the deeper we go, the more you'll see how one fruit flipped the rules of the global financial game. What Traoré built with bananas wasn't just agriculture, it was architecture. A whole new economic architecture rooted not in foreign aid, but in fertility. Not in debt relief, but in soil. As banana plantations expanded across Burkina Faso, a different kind of currency began to circulate: trust. Communities that had been told they were too poor, too dry, too backward to build anything of value now watched truckloads of their own harvests roll out to local markets, cross-border trade zones, and even coastal ports. The fruit that once rotted behind village huts now left the country with export labels that read "grown with sovereignty." But bananas weren't just shipped, they were transformed. Inside the heart of Bobo Dioulasso, Traoré's government converted an old military facility into the country's first banana processing and innovation center. There, young engineers experimented with biodegradable packaging made from banana fiber, while nutritionists developed high-energy food bars for school programs and emergency relief. Local soap makers began using banana oil. Textile artisans wove banana threads into handbags. Every part of the fruit was monetized, every layer of the economy touched. And it was working. Unemployment dropped, rural to urban migration slowed. Internal demand soared. People who once begged for jobs now created them. Street vendors rebranded themselves as banana merchants. Farmers became shareholders. Teachers launched banana literacy programs. The entire nation began speaking a new language, one of production, not protest. But success also attracts scrutiny. Global lenders, still hoping Traoré would come crawling back, began sending envoys to discuss restructuring options. But Traoré wasn't restructuring, he was replacing foreign dependency with domestic circulation, replacing loans with land, replacing fear with food. And the world was watching. At first, the international media dismissed it as symbolic farming. Then they called it agricultural nationalism. Then they stopped laughing, because the numbers were no joke. In less than 18 months, banana exports had tripled. Internal consumption stabilized. The trade deficit shrank. Even the West African Monetary Union, usually skeptical of such experiments, issued a cautious report titled Localized Agricultural Autonomy, the Burkinabe Model. In response, Traoré did not throw a parade. He visited a village that had tripled its school attendance because banana bar lunches meant children no longer worked the fields. He stood beside a young girl who said, "My papa grows freedom now." And in that moment, he knew the harvest wasn't just economic. It was generational. The IMF may have lent him money, but he gave his people something far more valuable: meaning. If you believe in building from within, write "We grow value" in the comments. Like this video to help more people see what leadership rooted in land can really achieve. As Burkina Faso's banana economy bloomed, what once looked like a simple farming initiative was now being tracked by satellite, debated in think tanks, and quietly feared in high-level trade circles. Because Traoré had not just cultivated fruit, he had cultivated a threat to a global system built on African dependence. Western economists began calling it agricultural populism. Diplomats warned of non-aligned instability. But what really scared them was that bananas were beginning to replace bureaucracy, that villagers without formal education were outperforming foreign-funded consultants, that African soil was generating not just crops but confidence. Reports from Côte d'Ivoire indicated that young farmers were now demanding access to national land reserves. In Ghana, students organized banana sovereignty panels on campus. In Nigeria, a youth-led cooperative launched their own banana-backed community currency, inspired by Traoré's model. The movement was going continental, and the reaction was swift. Global investors started pulling back from Burkina Faso, citing unpredictable economic behavior. The IMF hinted that future assistance would be conditional on institutional alignment. But the irony was thick. What they called unpredictable was actually sustainable. What they called dangerous was simply independent. And while they issued warnings, Traoré issued deeds. He transferred more than 40,000 hectares of state land to local farming collectives. He passed a decree ensuring that no Burkinabe agricultural product could be exported raw without at least one layer of local processing. He created banana bonds, government-backed savings notes tied directly to banana revenue, that quickly outsold traditional treasury bonds. The banks didn't know how to react. What do you do when your most reliable debtor stops borrowing and starts planting? What do you do when the people begin to understand that interest is a trap, but harvest is freedom? This wasn't rebellion, it was realignment. And for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso was not just reacting to global markets, it was redirecting them. Meanwhile, Traoré remained calm. No shouting, no threats, just rows and rows of green. His strategy was silent and sun-fed, and in that silence was a message. We are not asking, we are growing. And that message echoed beyond economics. Artists began sculpting banana trees in bronze. Schools replaced imported snacks with banana-based meals. Musicians dropped tracks with hooks like "From Peel to Power." A new culture was emerging, one where productivity was no longer measured in spreadsheets, but in self-worth. This wasn't just about farming, it was about framing, about changing the way Africa sees itself and the way the world is forced to respond. If you see the power in this peaceful transformation, write "We grow to be free" in the comments, like this video, to help spread the model that is quietly rewriting what it means to lead. In Burkina Faso, the banana was no longer just a crop. It had become a conversation, a statement of intent, of vision, of resistance. Children who once whispered about fleeing to Europe now shouted slogans like, "We peel for power," across playgrounds. Banana-themed murals spread across cities. And in homes, markets, mosques, and churches, people spoke of one thing more than any politics, war, or news: dignity. The kind of dignity that grows in your own backyard and feeds your family without permission from foreign banks. Ibrahim Traoré had done something extraordinary, not through force or foreign partnerships, but through food. And that food, rooted in African soil, was nourishing something bigger than bellies. It was feeding identity. But identity is dangerous to those who profit from silence. As Burkina Faso's banana model spread, so did attempts to discredit it. International newspapers began publishing editorials claiming the program was unsustainable, inflationary, or worse, symbolic. Western TV hosts mocked Traoré, calling him the banana president, thinking the title would humiliate. Instead, it became a badge of honor. On social media, Burkinabe youth made memes of Traoré in banana armor, riding tractors like tanks. Schools held Banana Pride days. Farmers painted their tractors yellow. And Traoré didn't respond with outrage, he responded with output. While the world debated him, he built. While economists predicted collapse, he expanded. In the Sahel region, where the soil was thought to be too poor for anything, his agricultural team used traditional terracing techniques, solar drip systems, and natural compost to convert brown into green. Yields exploded. Families returned to abandoned villages. Wells were restored. Even nomadic groups asked for training on banana cultivation. What once was mocked as a soft strategy had become the strongest weapon Burkina Faso had ever known. Because food is power, and the kind of power that grows from the ground up can't be sanctioned, frozen, or overthrown. It's not stored in banks, it's stored in trust, in land, in people, and most importantly, in memory. Because now the children of Burkina Faso will grow up not just eating what they planted, but remembering who gave them that right. And no creditor can erase that. Meanwhile, other African nations took notice. Delegations arrived from Togo, Mali, and Niger. They didn't come to offer aid, they came to study, to walk the fields, to speak with women's cooperatives, to learn how a man who inherited debt had instead cultivated destiny. And Traoré welcomed them not as students, but as partners, because he knew the banana economy wasn't about fruit. It was about freedom. And freedom, when it tastes this good, spreads fast. If this part of the story fills you with pride, comment, grow, and rise. Like this video to help show the world that true revolution doesn't always march. It sometimes grows in rows. Burkina Faso was no longer just growing bananas. It was growing belief. What started in fields had now entered classrooms, courtrooms, ministries. Traoré didn't just swoop at farming. He turned the banana economy into a national curriculum. Schools began offering agricultural innovation as a core subject. Students built irrigation models from recycled parts. Universities partnered with rural cooperatives to track soil health using locally made sensors. The Ministry of Finance restructured its development model, not around aid cycles or donor targets, but around crop cycles and community data. It wasn't just reform, it was redesign. Even the judicial system adapted. A special tribunal was set up to mediate land disputes arising from new farming zones, ensuring justice remained as local as the crops. Every institution was touched, not by force but by function. Because the banana wasn't just feeding the economy, it was feeding trust. And trust is more powerful than any policy. It creates motion where money fails. It turns silence into strategy. That's what made Traoré's model so dangerous to the old world order. Because it wasn't built on external inputs. It was built on internal ignition, a kind of quiet combustion that made every citizen a stakeholder, every harvest a headline. And yet, while Burkina Faso rose, international lenders fell silent. They no longer published growth warnings. They shifted focus to other regions. But behind closed doors, they watched as one of the poorest countries on the index began issuing bonds backed not by oil or gold, but by bananas. Watched as inflation stayed stable, as currency confidence rose, as diaspora investors began returning. A Burkinabe American entrepreneur opened a chocolate banana factory in Ouagadougou. A Ghanaian logistics firm partnered with local banana truckers to create a West African fresh fruit corridor. Suddenly, Burkina Faso wasn't just feeding itself, it was feeding trade. And trade meant traction. The IMF, the World Bank, and major lenders found themselves with less leverage, because leverage doesn't work when your target no longer needs to lean. And Traoré knew this. He didn't attack them in speeches. He outpaced them in systems. He knew a fight in headlines is temporary, but a fight in structure lasts. And his structure was clear. Grow from the root, scale through people, reinvest in dignity. Farmers received dividends. Women-led co-ops controlled processing plants. Rural youth became regional exporters. Even former soldiers found jobs in banana patrol units, guarding crops, training in logistics, protecting infrastructure. It was an economy that healed while it built. One that didn't just raise GDP, but raised people. And every time someone mocked it, Traoré smiled. Because he knew they weren't laughing at bananas. They were panicking at what bananas had become. A new foundation. If you see the brilliance in this, come in and talk, plant the system. Like this video and share it, because in the next part, we show how this homegrown model began rewriting Africa's relationship with the world. Burkina Faso had become a headline no one expected, not for conflict, not for crisis, but for competence. And that competence was now reaching beyond borders. When a country rises without permission, the world takes notice, even if it pretends not to. Embassies began updating reports. Intelligence briefings included lines like agricultural-led stabilization, non-aligned resource autonomy, regional influence via food systems. But behind the technical language was a simple truth. They didn't know how to control what they didn't create, because for decades, Africa's place in the global order had been scripted. Provide raw materials, receive conditional aid, borrow money, import solutions, twin, obey, repeat. But now, a landlocked nation once dismissed as poor and insecure was exporting models instead of minerals. Traoré didn't fly to Davos. He flew to Bamako, Niamey, and Lomé, where leaders were less interested in applause and more interested in answers. How did you do it? They asked. And he told them, I didn't. We did. That we was the secret. It wasn't one man. It was a movement, built on land, loyalty, and labor. From the seed to the system, it belonged to the people, and that made it unstoppable. Soon, African universities began adding the Burkinabe banana model to economic syllabi. Development podcasts from Brazil to Bangladesh analyzed it as a post-colonial case study. In the Caribbean, farmer unions sent delegations to learn. In India, a rural governance summit referenced banana-led decentralization. This wasn't hype, it was proof. And proof travels fast. But proof also triggers fear. Some Western investors called for trade recalibrations. Others pressured regional banks to monitor risks. A leaked memo from a European finance group warned of precedents that could undermine structural loan frameworks. Translation: if more countries follow Traoré, debt will lose its grip. And that grip is what kept power in place. But Traoré wasn't aiming to break systems. He was building alternatives. While the world postured, he positioned. Burkina Faso began offering banana futures contracts to East African exchanges. It launched the first Pan-African agro-co-op registry. It signed barter deals with neighbors, bananas for fuel, fiber for fertilizer. Every move bypassed old power centers. Every deal was done on African terms. And yet, Traoré never once declared an economic war. He didn't have to. His system worked. And systems that work speak louder than speeches. In one quiet visit to a remote village, he said to a group of youth, "The world won't believe you until you feed it. So feed it. Then they'll listen." And they did. Young Burkinabe entrepreneurs opened pop-up cafes serving banana-based meals, smoothies, and snacks. Diaspora chefs in Paris and New York proudly labeled their dishes Burkina style. And the world, little by little, began to taste a new kind of Africa, not flavored by pity or panic, but by pride. If this movement opens your mind to what's possible, write "Africa feeds the future" in the comments. Like and share this video so the message grows like the bananas that started it all. The world has seen African revolutions before, loud, defiant, sometimes broken before they even bloomed. But this was different. There were no marches, no riots, no burning of flags. There were only crops, smiles, joys, meals. A quiet kind of revolution, the kind that made no headlines until it made history. And that's what terrified the old guard most. Because if Burkina Faso could rise on fruit and focus, what excuse would the rest of the continent have left? The IMF, World Bank, and foreign donors weren't just losing economic leverage. They were losing the narrative. For too long, they had positioned themselves as Africa's saviors. But now, in Traoré's Burkina Faso, salvation came from seeds, not signatures. Change came from within, not from instructions. And it showed. Former aid recipients were now aid resistors. Burkinabe officials declined new development partnerships that didn't include ownership clauses. NGOs were told, work with us, not above us. The game had changed, and Traoré, ever strategic, didn't just lead from above. He delegated, empowered, lifted. Local mayors were given budget control for farming infrastructure. Women's groups were granted exclusive access to export licenses. Teenagers in tech clubs were asked to design banana tracking software, and they did. A 16-year-old girl from Wahiguya built an app now used in 23 districts. Leadership was no longer about one hero. It was about millions of hands shaping a shared direction. The idea that leadership lives in every village, every hand that plants, every voice that asks, what next, was spreading. And that's when the attacks began. Not with bombs, but with headlines. International outlets ran stories suggesting economic overreach, data manipulation, even food dependency risks. A former European official called the model utopian populism. Another said, bananas can't build nations. But the people already knew different. Because they weren't watching change, they were living it. They were eating meals grown by neighbors, wearing fabrics processed from local waste, and trading on terms their parents never dreamed of. And so they responded, not with protests, but with presence. Community markets doubled. Banana bond subscriptions sold out. Neighborhoods volunteered for farm labor rotation. Even schools hosted weekend planning festivals. The more the outside doubted, the harder the inside pushed. Traoré said it best in a televised address. They think leadership is standing at a podium. We know it's standing in the sun, with your people, with your hands in the earth. That was the new standard, not slogans, but systems, not donors, but doers. And slowly the rest of the continent began to listen differently. If this part ignites something in you, comment, lead from the land. Like and share this so others can see what African leadership looks like when it grows from the ground up. The banana was no longer just a fruit. It had become a flag that didn't wave in the wind, but stood firm in the hands of farmers, women, youth, and leaders who had never been seen before. It was a declaration. We are done asking. From Nairobi to Kingston, from Lagos to Atlanta, people began whispering the same question. If they can do it, why can't we? That whisper grew into a movement. Universities in Senegal held seminars on the Burkina model. Activists in South Africa printed T-shirts with banana logos beside the word sovereignty. Caribbean nations explored banana-based trade corridors. And in Europe, behind polished smiles and development reports, there was silence and concern. Because when an idea spreads faster than money, it becomes uncontrollable. And Traoré's idea was wildfire, a system not based on protest or poverty, but on production, not shaped by think tanks, but by communities, not justified by GDP, but by dignity. Burkina Faso had become a case study not in charity, but in courage, not in borrowing, but in building. And Traoré knew it. He rarely traveled abroad. Instead, he traveled inward, from province to province, listening, asking what was needed, watching where new cooperatives were rising. And everywhere he went, he repeated one message. Our currency is not paper. It is action. It wasn't about the IMF anymore. It wasn't even about debt. It was about a mentality that said, we have enough to begin. And when people begin with what they have, they learn that what they need isn't always outside. It's often already in their hands. That shift is what scared the world's power brokers, because they had built systems designed to manage scarcity. But Traoré's model created abundance, from waste, from land, from people they thought had no value. He gave value back to them, and they gave everything: their labor, their trust, their belief. In return, they got schools, roads, meals, markets, not promises, proof, real results. And those results became contagious. Delegations from Latin America visited Bobo Dioulasso. Indonesian agritech firms signed MOUs with Burkinabe engineers. African-American investors formed a banana-backed venture fund. The movement had gone global, and yet it never lost its root. A farmer in rural Burkina Faso who had never left his village once said, "I may not travel, but my fruit travels. It tells the world who we are." That's what made it unstoppable. Because symbols are powerful, but symbols backed by systems are immortal. And this banana, mocked and underestimated, had now become both. If you see the symbol, feel the shift, and believe in what's possible when nations rise for themselves, comment, "We carry the root." Like this video so more people understand that the future is not imported. It's planted. This is not a story about bananas. It's a story about belief, about a nation told it was too small, too weak, too poor, rising with nothing but its own soil and spirit. They handed Ibrahim Traoré 150 million in debt, hoping it would crush him. But he used it as compost. He turned a burden into a blueprint. He didn't burn the IMF with anger. He made them irrelevant with results. Because when your economy grows from within, you no longer need permission. You no longer wait for recognition. You simply become undeniable. That is what Burkina Faso did. Not with weapons, not with protests, but with plans, with systems, with strategy. While the world asked for reforms, Traoré built reality. And in doing so, he didn't just revive his country, he rewrote the rules. Rules that said power flows from debt. He said it flows from dignity. That wealth is not in foreign banks. It's in fields, families, and futures. That development is not what you import, but what you awaken. Now the world watches in silence. They call it a case study, an exception, a miracle. But it's none of those things. It's a reminder that Africa was never broken. It was only interrupted. Interrupted by extractive models, false debts, and global narratives that served everyone except those who lived the story. Traoré didn't ask for reparations. He created restoration. He didn't shout slogans. He showed systems. And those systems are now moving beyond bananas, into education, health, manufacturing, energy. Every sector is being rebuilt with the same principle. Plant what we need, harvest what we deserve. And that principle is spreading, not through diplomacy, but through demonstration. Because the world listens differently when results speak. And Burkina Faso is speaking loud, without raising its voice. This is what happens when leadership grows from land, not legacy. When a president listens more than he commands. When a nation believes more in hands than headlines. If this story has moved you, stirred something in your chest, then comment, "We harvest our future." Like this video and subscribe to this channel because there are more stories rising, more voices building, and more nations waking up. And just like Traoré proved, you don't need billions to start. You only need belief. What they called debt, he turned into destiny. And that is how Burkina Faso fed its people, freed its future, and quietly burned the empire of control with bananas.